All right, hello and welcome to the October meeting of CONDG, or Central Ohio.NET Developers Group. I've heard it referred to as CORNDG in the community. That would be an incorrect name for us, but it is memorable. So this is our last meeting of the year where we have Chris Farrell talking about application logging, and he's got some demos ready to go, so we're really happy to have that. This is also our first meeting at Central Insurance, so if you were in the room with me, you see how lovely it is and how tasty the pizza is. But thank you to Central for hosting us. We really appreciate it. We needed to find a new home. We had a lot of really good options. Let us know how this works for you, and we'll make our plans for next year. But we're very, very appreciative of our home here with Central. So thank you. So if you are on the Wi-Fi, which I don't think you are, please device responsibly so that Chris's demos are nice and your streaming experience is good. If you still have a Windows phone, good on you. But I don't think Microsoft is going to be bringing it back anytime soon. I'm still sad about that. So if you came here and you're not aware of Meetup, well, Meetup is a thing, and it's a good way of finding out what we're doing in the future. Our next meeting is going to be the fourth Thursday of January. So it should be the Thursday after Code Mash, I believe, for those who are attending that. But we meet the fourth Thursday of every month. The fourth Thursday of November and December are problematic, and we're too lazy to find another day of the week, so that's why we meet 10 times a year. The organizing team is Alan over there, who is running our stream, myself, Matt Eland, and then we have Sam Gomez in the back, making sure nobody leaves early. So thank you for that, Sam. If you want to help us, chat with us. We'd love to chat about how you can help in the new year. This is our last meeting in 2024. If you are interested in speaking in 2025 or know somebody who is, we actually have a sponsored gift from Chris. So Chris has offered to give this to the first person who is agreeing to present in the new year. So if you are interested in speaking on something and would like to chat with us, we'd be happy to help you. And there's a financial incentive associated with that. So thank you for that nice offering. But very good presentation remote too. We are on YouTube. We are out live on YouTube right now. Hi, YouTube. Last time I checked, we had over 325 and a half subscribers. So that is technically true with 324. I just always like to add the 325.5 for folks. So if you want to check out old meetings, or you can't make it to a meeting, or you're feeling sick or whatever, that's a good option for you. Sometimes it doesn't work out. We are not able to stream. We're not even able to record. But most of the time we are, and that's largely thanks to Alan. So thank you, Alan, for that. We are on Twitter, barely. We need to be more on Twitter, but we are out there on Twitter. We are also out there on LinkedIn as well. And please feel free to post into LinkedIn if you are looking to hire, if you're looking for new opportunities. You are welcome to post in that group. You find something cool and nerdy, that's there for you to share in that area. We try to keep that focused mostly on developers. We don't usually add recruiters to that group. So just heads up there. Thank you to our sponsors, Central Insurance, for the pizza and hosting and the like. .NET Foundation pays our dues for Meetup, which are increasing over the years as time goes on. So we're very appreciative of them. They also help steward open source software with .NET, which is pretty awesome. JetBrains is our sponsor as well with our raffle prizes. I have something more on them in a minute. And this month we have a book from Pact, actually by me. So this is Data Science with .NET and Polyglot Notebooks. I actually had to check the title of my own book that I published 2 months ago. But that will be one of our raffle prizes today. And Sam Gomez was one of our technical reviewers for that. So thank you, Sam. So speaking of JetBrains, this actually just happened today. JetBrains announced that the WebStorm IDE for web development and the Rider IDE for .NET development are now free for non-commercial use. So if you run on Linux like I do, or Mac, or if you're just cheap and don't want to pay for Visual Studio, well, you have the option of using Rider now, as long as you're not doing anything commercial with it, which is really awesome. I'm really excited about that because that means I can now use more examples with Rider, knowing that other people will be able to use it without having to pay, which is awesome. But if you wanted to use ReSharper or something like that, we have some licenses to give away. And since this is our last meeting of the year, we have a lot more licenses to give away than we normally would. You just might have to wait a couple months for your license. But we should give away about 3 licenses this month. So that'll be awesome. Events coming up, believe it or not, before our next meeting, we will have our CodeMash conference. The tickets have opened, ticket sales have opened. Raise your hand if you are attending CodeMash this year. Okay. A few hands going up, a few hands saying maybe. Anybody speaking at CodeMash this year? Okay. I'm giving like a kids mash talk, so like kind of half counts. I'll be dressed as a mad data scientist, which will be hilarious, and event security will be following me around. But that's for kids only. So raise your hand if you are hiring. Okay. Sarah, where do you work?
I should preface this with it's a Ruby on Rails company. Sorry about that, but it's TCS software just down the street by Kroger.
Okay, so TCS software is looking for Ruby on Rails.
Yep. Really, any dev experience is fine. Any dev level is fine.
Okay.
Looking for more people.
So TCS software.
Yep.
Okay. And Alan, you're with Improving. So Improving is looking for developers. I'm assuming. Always developers. So
Always
there
developers.
We go. So if you're looking for work, come chat with these folks. They will help you figure out next steps there, and if that's a good fit for you. You have one more?
So my name is Farrell. I'm actually at Central, and we are looking for engineers as well. I think we're looking for senior and early career engineers. So yeah, let's chat.
Yeah. And I know someone on your staff, and she's very happy here. So Central Insurance would be a great fit for you, hopefully. So awesome. So when at Central, do as Central does. If you are looking for the bathroom, go all the way out that door. When you hit the wall, take a left, go straight. When you see the word excellence on the wall on your right, you need to take a left, and then the bathrooms will be on your left. So a little bit windy, but they're going to be over that way. There is no code. If you leave the building, you've done something wrong. Also, that's very impressive because we're on the 4th floor. Please feel free to ask Chris questions as he's going. No questions, Chris says. No questions. Okay, so that's our policy. If you need to get up and use the bathroom, get some pizza, get some drinks, that's cool. Just be quiet and respectful is all we ask. Okay, and now I'm going to turn things over to Chris for a guide to application logging, which is usually misunderstood and much more important than people realize it, because when you're trying to figure out what's wrong, well, you need the logs you don't have. So yeah, there we go. Chris, I'll unplug and let you get plugged in here and switched over on the app.
Good job. You know what? Before I do that, I should probably do this.
Oh, yeah, for our online experience.
Actually, no, it's in the back. Sit somewhere. All right. Oh my God. Wow. All right. One small correction. It's not just logging. It's let's geek out over logging, because this is a topic I really enjoy. It's a topic that I probably care too much about. It's only because I have spent a lot of time supporting production code. And I'm one of those guys who tries to chase excellence and perfection. Customer service is something very important to me. I just want my software to work beautifully. A lot of people take more enjoyment out of writing the software. I take enjoyment out of seeing it work. So real quick, before we start, what's everybody's expertise level as far as like senior? Okay, like junior, beginner? Okay. What's our expertise with logging? Is anybody doing logging right now? Couple people? Is anybody, what tools are we using? Just shout them out. What was that back there?
And one, stay long.
Okay. Perfect. So it's my contact information. You can reach me through any of these. I'm self-employed, so my work email is still just me, you know. I just started my own company 2 or 3 months ago, so it's quite the adventure so far. But the good news is I only work like 2 blocks away, so I actually walked here. I don't really blog much. I've got some stuff to blog. I just got to get around to writing it, so I'll get there. I don't really post on social media either, but I do love to help people, and it wasn't on my bio, but you know, I've worked in Columbus Consulting for 13 years. I was in leadership. I've actually hired probably 100 people, helped them start their career. I love mentoring, so if there's something I can do to help somebody, if somebody's looking for a job, you want somebody to look through your resume, you know, you want somebody to give you a practice interview, maybe introduce you to a recruiter. You know, worked in consulting long enough, I probably know 70 or 80 recruiters. You know, I had a hard time. I graduated in 03, and it was not the good time to graduate in IT. It took me forever to find a job, but some people helped me out, and I like to pay it forward. So, and that's not like something I charge for. I just, you know, that's just something I do to help people. So, and I find the good karma comes back to me. So, okay. Obligatory disclaimer. My lawyer didn't make me write this. I just think it's a good idea. You know, when you're logging, you have to be careful what you're logging. Some of the commercial tools actually have data masking built in, but your log data can be as sensitive, if not more sensitive, than your actual transactional data. So please apply the correct encryption, security, access control, data retention, all that stuff. Make sure when you're logging PII, you're either masking, obfuscating, or just correctly securing it. Each company's gonna have its own rules. My personal opinion is if I secure my log data to the same level as my transactional data, I shouldn't need to do that, but different companies have different policies and it depends on how sensitive your information is. If you're logging health information or financial information, or if it's just business transactions. But you know, make sure you just don't get yourself into trouble with this. And the one thing that I hope people take away from this, I have actually done a previous presentation that I did like 8 times. It was called Data-Driven Software Development. The biggest thing that I try to get people to take away from this talk, or any related talks, is that logging is not just something you do for debugging an issue. Logging tools themselves are fantastic for generating data by your application. And what nobody ever occurs to them is that your application can use the data you generate to do some really cool things. So a lot of this is logging itself is not terribly difficult, but some of the use cases and some of the best practices are really, that's where it's at. So if you want to learn logging, there's 1,000 demos, there's instructions, they're not hard to follow. So I'm going to try to skip over that a little quicker, but I can slow down if anybody wants me to. But a lot of this is more about lessons learned from 20 years of doing it. And I hope that's more useful because people don't share that as often. But the other thing is just have fun with it. Get creative. Think outside the box. So our agenda, pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about just why logging is important, some of those examples. Go over some terminology and some common concepts just at a very high level. And then I'm going to give you some likely argumentative recommendations from my experience. Keep in mind personal opinions and the situations change based upon what you're in. Debugging your logging, I'm probably not going to show that in the presentation, but I included it in the slide deck, which I'll send to you, just because the problem is logging is designed to fail silently. So a lot of times, depending on your environment, you're logging and you're not getting any output. And it's because something's wrong with your logging or your configuration, and it's really hard to debug code when it doesn't do anything, and you're like, I told it to do something, it didn't do anything. I didn't get an error, I didn't get a stack trace, I didn't get a log for my logging. So most logging tools have internal diagnostics you can turn on if you look them up. Depending on your tool, just look it up. It'll save you a ton of effort and pain. I'm probably going to just skip that unless time allows, or if anybody really wants to see it. And we'll just go to demos, and then I'll just leave that for references. So obviously, reason for logging is to try to help solve, debug problems. Like I said, I'm a customer service nut. I like to find problems before people know they exist and then fix them. Way back in probably 2005, 2006, and this was classic ASP, by the way, so that gives you the date time period of this. I actually detected an error, fixed it, deployed it, and called the customer in the same minute. So I follow the broken window theory. Is anybody familiar with that? Okay, so the idea is if you take care of things and keep everything nice and orderly, then if one thing's out of place, it stands out. you fix it. It takes very little effort to keep it clean. The problem is if you let it turn into chaos, then things can just get hidden, and it takes a lot of effort. You get overwhelmed, you get stressed. There's actually a lot of broken window theory is cited a lot from a lot of books in IT, but it's a theory from outside IT, but it's worth looking into. It's argumentative to some people, but the idea is if you stay ahead of it, then it's easy to stay ahead of it, and life's better, and you're a superstar. And it plays much better for you when you tell the customer, like, hey, we found an issue the other day, we went ahead and fixed it and just wanted to let you know, versus the customer calling up and saying, nothing works, I can't do my business, when's it going to be fixed? One of those is more stressful than the other. So yeah, the sooner you find it also, the cost of fixing it can be a lot smaller. So a lot of times if you get a bug or something in production, now you might be fixing bad data. Or now you might have had customers suffer outages and you have to, work through lost sales, lost customers. There's a lot of reasons why finding bugs sooner is better. So I choose to be proactive. Sometimes you have to fight to get the bandwidth to say, I'm gonna fix this before I build the next feature, but it's a fight worth fighting. Everybody in the room's had problems reproducing an issue before, right? So a big problem is even if you have error handling, you just get a static trace and an error message, but how did I get there? Logging can give you a lot of the story that got you to that event. So that's really where it gets useful. Another big problem is a lot of times you ask somebody, well, what did you do to cause this problem? And they tell you, but they're human beings. Maybe they forgot, or maybe they thought they did something and they actually didn't. I'll show you one of the logging demos later where we record what they do. So we don't have to ask them, first of all. And the second of all, if they do tell us, we're like, no, you actually did this, and that was the problem. So could be a huge time saver there versus not having one. And that's kind of an obvious thing, but I just have to include it. This is an interesting one, getting rid of old code. This is actually an infographic from my older presentation, which actually came from Office, I believe. They studied Excel, and they kept getting all these feature requests, and their answer consistently was, it's already in there. People just didn't know it. But the gist of software is people never want to get rid of code because they don't know if it's still needed or who's using it. Logging can answer those questions for you. So you want to delete code, you can say, look, nobody's used it for 9 months, or only this one customer uses it, let's go talk to them. You get rid of your code. So a big problem with code is keeping it modern, current, testing it, refactoring it, changing it. If you can understand like this block of code is never used, then you get a better chance of getting rid of it. And trust me, your code base has a ton of unused code. But the thing is, you have to make that sale, and it's not an easy argument. I once heard a great quote: "You only need data if you want money, power, and influence. Otherwise, you don't need data." Well, this gives you the data. It really is a good quote. That's why I remembered it and use it. But that ties into, like I said, logging is a way to generate data about your application, right? Everybody in here works to gather and create and shape and manipulate data for your customer for their business. We as software developers very seldom use data that we generate for ourselves to make our software better. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry to do data lakes, data warehouses, BI, to help these customers make better insights. And as a software developer, it's the shoemaker's kids go shoeless. That's kind of was the gist of my previous presentation that I've adapted to this. Is as software developers, we can use our software and do some cool things. So this one's actually, man, that light's good. Gosh. It's an old screenshot, but I like to be a little entertaining in my screenshots if you can read it. I like software that works, and sometimes you got to make people do things. As a dev lead, I've had a couple of developers where the first thing you do before you're going to commit it is, I want to see a demo, and half the time it didn't work. And eventually they know, if he's going to make me demo it and it doesn't work, then they actually test their work. I guarantee you, if you know that the developers know that you're going to check and see if you tested your work before they passed it to QA, they're going to start testing their work more. And then things just go through QA a little easier, or the questions come up sooner. And again, it's all about finding the problems and questions and opportunities sooner. So if developers know you're going to say, like, how much did you test your work before you threw it to QA? And the answer is almost none, like, well. Likewise, this is one of the earlier examples. I think I did this one in 2015, is I had a client who, we would do like 2-3 months of work. I was a consultant, then we passed to the customer for UAT. They'd have 2 weeks to UAT it, and nothing, 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 and then the last day of UAT, here's a bunch of stuff, or worse, hey, we didn't have a chance to get to it. So we started using logging in our dev environments, in our QA environments, and we'd send the CEO a report every day of how much the UAT testers and QA testers had tested by person. What's that?
It's diabolical.
Transparency. One of my favorite quotes that I actually made myself, and it was by pure accident, I realized it after the fact, is the value of transparency is clear. But the thing is, that kind of reporting, and when, again, anything that can be measured can be managed, and anything that's managed typically improves. So if people know you're going to do this and you set the expectation, all of a sudden things fall in line. And if we have time, I think I was talking to, I can't see through the light where he went. He was out in the lobby from Central Transfer. Oh, there he is. You're directly behind the light. Sorry about that.
No worries.
You can actually use your logs to generate test cases. And in fact, that's what I was telling them about. And hopefully with time, I could show you part of it. It's pretty slick. Security. Most application security, most IT security, foolishly, runs off of static rules, right? You set some kind of rule, but it treats every request independently. So it can be really hard given a single request to know is this malicious or not. But if you take 3 or 4 requests, I can pretty much tell you almost for certain with very little effort, yeah, this is a normal user who just screwed up, or this guy's doing something weird. Another important thing about security is if you give me unlimited amounts of time and effort to break in, I'm going to get in. You know, security is meant to slow you down, but there's no such thing as foolproof security. You have to be perfect. So, you know, the thing is, if you can find a way to tie your security code and make it more stateful, to say like, you know, real simple examples. If a single IP address or single username causes too many 500 errors in a period of time, I know you're an attacker. And I can just automatically throttle you or block you or report you or whatever. So it's a great example of a logging use case. Is I'll log those 400s or 500s. I'll just have an IP. I'll log your IP address and date time. And too many results, every time you cause an error, I'll check that table. Too many results, you might get throttled or blocked or reported. Likewise, at a previous employer, we had a lot of content that was public. And they were all legitimate requests, and they were all returning 200s, but our systems were getting absolutely crushed. And our systems had some serious bandwidth. It turned out we had somebody just downloading our site's content, and they were using a multitude of machines from both AWS and Azure at the same time, and it was literally crushing us. They were a well-funded attack. They weren't an attacker, they were training an LLM. And they were literally like scraping our, I don't want to reveal who it was, but 500 terabytes of data, which was killing our network and our servers and our storage and, you know. But it was legitimate usage other than, you know, but we start going through those logs and you're trying to figure out what's going on. You know, it's helpful to have logs for something like that. Because otherwise it just looks legitimate. Like, hey, we just got a bunch of users. It's busy. Performance. How many people in the room have ever had somebody say, like, the application we're getting reports is slow today? You go look at it and it's fine. Never happened? Or you get reports that so-and-so user went to a page and it's slow, and you go to it and it's lightning fast, and 2 weeks later you find out, like, oh, I just had to put in these certain couple of parameters to open this one, and then it was slow as heck because the data changed the execution path or caused more looping or something like that. So logging can be a great way of, you can look up what the normal boundaries are and compare it to the current. You can also see, you know, I changed my code, did it slow down, did it get faster? And you can do a lot of these things programmatically. I'm not doing these things manually, trust me. I do them in batch. But it's a good use case because it can save you from wasting a lot of effort optimizing something. It's also a great way of just finding where that hotspot is. So you just, you know, your CPU, your memory, whatever's pegging, to go find really quickly what the slow spot is. And it might just be this 1 or 2 endpoints with a certain parameter or a certain user or a certain whatever. Metrics. Everybody here works as the product owner, right? They want to know how people are using their system. They want to know conversions and KPIs, and they want to report on them and measure them and have something to make decisions from. I'm just going to change my, so I can see my clock, sorry. You know, and they want to see trending. They want to see, is it getting better? They want to see, is it getting worse? The more sophisticated users might do A/B testing or canary testing and want to measure, like, you guys are an insurance company, I'm sure you do your independent insurance because I've actually had you as a carrier. So you have a quote and issuance process. Then you want to see how many of those bind. So tracking those things, like how many people started this. It's almost a sales funnel. How many people started? How many people in step 2? How many people in step 3? What's my drop off at each step? How much time was spent at each step? But then you might want to cross-analyze it by user, by agency, by type of policy, by whatever. But having that data to make decisions about your software allows you to be a lot smarter. Otherwise, without the data, you're just guessing. So just jumping to some terminology, which we already kind of hit it before we started the presentation, but it's important to delineate because it can get confusing, and depending on which audience you're talking to. There's a slight language difference, if you want to be particular about it, between logging, telemetry, and APM. So logging is literally just you're recording some data. Go ahead. Telemetry is typically instrumentation that's built in. But that was actually one of the things that got me really interested in logging was I saw a presentation from, at the time, he worked at Microsoft, Brian Prince, who actually started CodeMash, by the way, and also got me my job 13 years ago. He was talking about how much telemetry Microsoft had built into, it was either XP or Vista or one of those operating systems, and how they had so many different data points that were reporting on that Windows release for the beta that they had an entire core of the Chicago nuclear plant dedicated to powering that data center. And they record how often you used each feature, each this, and he's like, it's like 100 times more telemetry than you had on the space shuttle, which, if you guys seen the Houston Control Center for the space shuttle, they're tracking all these different factors, But again, that was a great example. And it kind of got me intrigued and curious, And then APM kind of brings it together. There's a lot of products in that space. You guys, it sounds like a couple people may have used them, not everybody. As we'll illustrate later, they do tend to get kind of expensive, so not everybody gets that opportunity. For this presentation, we're going to focus mostly on logging, but we will discuss a little bit of this. Am I going too fast, too slow? Questions, answers? I got a thumbs up. That's surprising. So one of the new buzzwords is structured logging. And essentially, logging used to just be I printed some text using a console.log or, depending how old you are, a cout statement or whatever, you printed a line of text to a file. And people didn't really get excited about logging because you just basically had these giant text files that were really unusable. You had to really read it, and it was a lot of volume of information and didn't really have a way of calling it out. You couldn't really process it electronically. So structured logs is basically the same thing, except for it has a structure, which really just means the fields are delimited so that they're machine readable now, which means you can now feed those into a search tool, a database, or whatever. You can query them, you can make sense of them, you can consume them. So most often you're going to see JSON, but you can also see CSV or tab delimited or field delimited. One of those delimiteds, we're all familiar with them. And you're generally not going to actually deal with that format. It's just a matter that whatever else you're using can read the format. It's machine readable is the shortest version. One call out though with structured logging is to make sure you don't destructure it. This is something every logging framework calls out, but it's still not always clear. So if you do the first one, what the heck happened? Oh, there it is. I hit the wrong button, technical error. Did everything go down? Still good? Okay. So if you do this, C# actually runs this part first and it'll just print a sentence. And this will show up in a demo later. Whereas if you do this, it knows that those are separate fields and it can actually log those in a structured way. So just worth calling that out. I'm sorry, I hear a lot of mumbling. Is it everything?
Matt to go way back there.
Talk to me later.
Yeah. He's preaching this a year ago.
Okay.
Yep.
This is more of a beginner thing. It can be useful. Personal opinions, I don't use it much, but some people might, is logging levels. And it's really just a way of turning up the volume, the squelch on a CV radio, or the volume level of how much detail you want. I personally leave it on max volume, but occasionally that can be too much noise. And you can turn it up and down. But essentially it's cascading, I guess. So if you have it set to trace, you'll see debug information. So whatever you have, you'll see everything up to that as well. So, but it could be nice, like, hey, everything's working fine. I don't want to see low-level trace or verbose, or these levels will change slightly based on which tool you're using. But like, hey, I only want to see errors. Everything's working fine. It's gonna make your logs a lot less noisy. But like I said, I use logging for a lot more than just error handling. So I want anything I'm taking the time to log, I want it where I can easily filter it. So I want it in there just in case. One nature of logging and data collection in general is you can never go back and collect what you didn't collect. So I just go ahead and collect it, and I can get rid of it if I want to. Personal opinion, every situation is different, so that's kind of just a ballpark. We're getting to logging providers a little bit. People don't know, but .NET's actually had logging since day one. System diagnostics, system trace right, system debug right. There was actually a lot of pub sub logging in there too, which is why I did a presentation of how to listen to your software. Is there were some great endpoints to get diagnostic data, but you had to know how to subscribe to them. Like WCF was a great example. If you wanted to do WCF logging, you just subscribe to this endpoint, and you get like very verbose, they had a viewer and everything, but nobody knew it.
Even ML.NET still has similar to that.
Okay, yeah, Microsoft's prolific for doing it, so they do it all the time. I believe it was in .NET Core 3.1, they added the iLogger interface, which is a structured logger. And it's still available now. I believe it's still available in .NET Framework applications. You can Google it. It's in one of the NuGet packages. I can look it up for you too.
Microsoft extension stuff, logging or something like that.
That sounds familiar, but they all blur together. So yeah, that's the built-in iLogger. It really only has, actually my list is wrong. It only has a couple of output syncs though, so it's not super great for production use. Obviously you can do a console logger. Files is an option for sure, but it's just not on there. I must have missed that or copy and paste the wrong site or whatever. Log4net's been around for forever, since probably .NET 1. It's a port of the Log4j Java framework. Has some more options, so you can do databases, you can do eventing, memory, you can do rolling files, you can do email. I don't know who's going to log to Telnet or UDP, but I guess somebody did. Serialog, my personal favorite. There's a list there, and I might go ahead and click it for you later, but there's so many different syncs that you can log to that pretty much everything you want is going to be covered, and that's one of many reasons I really just like Serialog. And then nlog is a great tool. I've used it. It's a lot simpler to configure than Log4net. It's capable if that's what you want to use and it's got the syncs you need. There's nothing wrong with it. So lots of options. Personal recommendations.
As he takes a sip.
Keep in mind, these are personal opinions. They're strongly held, but I'm very pragmatic. I believe that circumstances differ. There's no one size fits all, and I'm never the guy who just starts with a solution looking for a problem. This is just kind of where I've landed through my personal experiences, and your experiences may be different. So hopefully don't offend too many people. At the same time, I believe, if you follow you can't be a thought leader if you're just following the dogma. So sometimes you have to think differently and say, like, I understand that perspective and I just like this more, or I think this is better and here's why. So here we go. I almost never log the text files. Hopefully you don't either, but some people still do. This is the easiest, this is the default option. It works fine if you have a single application on a single server. I was actually recently trying to debug an application that was on 240 servers that had 3 different logs per application layer. And they were on remote servers, obviously, because I'm not logged into 240 servers. So when I wanted to figure out what's going on with this issue, I would have to go gather the log files from 240 different servers and then analyze these text files that were hardly readable to try to figure out what's going on. Basically, they were useless. So that can be a real problem. Plus, log text files, generally you can't access them remotely. You have to download them or log into that box to view them. And then even then, we found half the people in the organization were writing their own Python scripts to parse text files for logs, which is absurd. Nobody thinks that's a good idea, except for apparently senior leadership, who didn't probably know what's going on. So communication is one of the hardest problems. And there you go. And lastly, text files aren't indexed, so parsing them can be slow. You can solve this partially by doing centralized log management. You can have, if you have multiple servers and they do text logging, there are tools. I think I mentioned FluentBit on there as a log forwarder, where you can have it forward those logs on a periodic interval to a centralized location, which can make it a lot easier because now they're at least in one place, but they're still text files. So still hard to work with, but it's better. Personal opinion, I just don't use text files unless it's like Hello World or a local sample app, and even then I don't use it because the better options are the same effort or less. APM options, there's a lot of them. I've worked with a number of them. Datadog, Dynatrace, App Insights, New Relic, Stackify, SolarWinds. It's becoming a very large business space. A lot of these are now multi-billion-dollar companies on the stock exchange. Which also the fact that there's multi-billion-dollar companies doing this in the stock exchange tells you how expensive they are.
Yeah.
A common solution you'll see is people just throwing search tools on top of these so they can search them. So like Elk Stack is a great example. You have a search tool and then you have a reporting dashboard going on top of it. The benefit is you, just like this, get some really beautiful graphics that take almost no time to build, and that's nice. And they also do a great job of like pulling the telemetry of monitoring like your server health, your CPU, memory, response time. They pull a lot of data and then they can correlate it with your logs, and that's really great. And you can get the basics of it pretty quickly and easily. There's a lot of downsides though, and this is where I'm going to upset people. They're very expensive. In fact, the last 3 places I've been at that's used one of these has switched their APM roughly every 1 to 2 years because the cost got too high, so they switched to a cheaper one. And then the cost got too high and they switched to a cheaper one. One of them was actually on Elk, which used to be free, and then next thing you know, it's an 7 or 8 figure cost for them because it went commercial, and it didn't go like from free to cheap. It went from free to unaffordable, which seems to be a trend in this space. So they're great tools if you can use them, but cost is almost always an issue. You have very limited data retention. If you think about like them just running this server, you're collecting all that log data for that many people. In most cases, you have 14 days or 28 days or less than a month of data retention. So if you get a bug report and you're in the middle of a sprint and you're doing 2-week sprints, and it gets put in the next sprint or 2 sprints away, your data could be gone by the time you get to it. You definitely couldn't go back and say, did this start 3 months ago or 4 months ago? Your data's gone. So there are downsides. You get a lot of great monitoring and AI out of the box, which is nice. And they'll alert you, they'll notice trends. That stuff's beautiful. But they do have a lot of downsides also. And this is one of the biggest ones. Remember, I want to find bugs sooner. Because of cost, a lot of people won't deploy their APM in non-production environments, which means I don't have really good logging until I go to production. By then, I've deployed a bug. So I would prefer to find it before then. Personal opinion. How many people do I have upset so far? Okay, let's try harder. A lot of people will tell you don't log to a database. That's personally my favorite. I think a lot of people telling you not to log to a database is either never supported a production application, or they work for companies that make the other expensive software. Here's some of the reasons why I personally like it. Is I was a consultant. Some of my clients, were nonprofits and tiny. Some of them were huge corporations. 100% of them could afford a database. They're ubiquitous tools. Everybody has them. Everybody knows how to use them. Databases obviously support remote connections. They have fantastic indexing, and the good ones, the enterprise ones, have fantastic JSON support now too. SQL's pretty widely known. Most of my BAs and QAs know SQL. Some of my product owners have known SQL, and if not, I can teach them. Or I can just write the script and say, here, press this button. Obviously, if you have SQL Server, you can pull it to a data warehouse. You can run a Power BI on it. You can do, you can build those dashboards with about the same effort, but you actually have your own control over it. You're not limited to just what they've built. You can build whatever you want, providing you have the tools. This is a fun one. Quite often, for the sake of business metrics, I might take an export from your ERP system or from some other transactional system, join it to some of the logs, and actually, maybe join it to your financial statements or whatever, and build you a better report than you could have built separately. And then I do recommend separate database, and again, secure it. They don't tend to be resource heavy, but this way you can just take that out of the equation. So separate hardware, not a big deal. So this is an interesting concept that I actually learned in college. But the reason why everybody thinks databases are slow for this is because they essentially throw everything into one pile with no structure and no organization, and then run every query against it and wonder why it's slow. That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, imagine you had a file system, you just threw every file in the flat level with no naming conventions and say, now go find the file. Like, obviously it's not very well organized, not very well structured. So there's this data pyramid thing, which actually I learned in college. And the idea is gather everything you get. You don't know what you're going to need later, so just collect everything, record everything now. You can always get rid of it later, or you can archive it. Storage is cheap, right? But as you identify what you're going to need or what you're going to want, you can build a more specialized logger. You add structure to it. You refine it. You aggregate it. You filter it. You don't need to record everything. And as you move up, that raw data that's inherently, not very useful becomes more and more useful. But an important thing is data itself, this pile should be mostly just write-only. Optimized write-only, you're never going to read it online. So you shouldn't be really going through that data online. You do some offline jobs, and then once you know what the use case is, you can use that to populate your history. Does that make sense? Great example, they wanted to know their financial services industry, and people search for rates on their system. They want to know what rates people are searching for. It's like you can't answer that because it's not actually a transaction if somebody doesn't buy something. But we were able to go through their logs, and then we built a specialized, okay, now we're going to make a rate log. Every time somebody hits it, we're going to put just those terms here, but we still keep it in the other place so we can answer every question you have. It's a great example. And just as you move up, you're aggregating, you're filtering, you're refining. The top level is going to be mostly read and very fast. The bottom level is going to be mostly write. If you do that, a sequential write to a database is as fast as writing to a file. This is one that people get wired up about, and I don't have that strong of an opinion on it, but I'll just weigh in. Most of these logging tools can be configured through code or through config files. It used to be that you could only change the logging levels through config files, and that you'd have to redeploy the app if you did through code. That's not necessarily true anymore. Plus, if you're good at CI/CD, redeploying the app is not a big deal. Plus, I just leave mine on Macs usually, like I said. Some specific advantages, though, is like my current project has 5 or 6 apps that deploy from one solution, and they all log to the same store, so I would have to copy the configuration to 6 places, and that's obviously not dry. So for us, I kind of prefer to configure in code for that project, but there's other projects where configuring in your config files is better. Do what makes sense, make a good judgment call. I don't really, just that's some trade-offs there. There actually are options, at least with Serialog, if you read the documentation, though, you can change the logging level even if you configure it in code. Okay, we're doing good on time. So I'll show these real quickly, but like I said, logging will fail silently. Here's how you do Serialog. Log4net, if you're still using it, was one of the harder ones. There's actually 2 parts. Scott Hanselman, I think, has this blog from like 2014. And then there's some references there, but we'll switch to the demos. Questions so far?
How can you be able to log if something needs to be updated? Like maybe like a developer tool needs to be updated, and it's it's kind of like causing an error because you haven't updated the developer tool to the latest version. Like how would the log be able? How would we be able to find that in the logs?
I would hope you'd find that before deploying, but if it's been deployed long enough, you still wouldn't have a compatibility issue unless you deploy it again. But if it is causing an error, you hopefully would see it in your error logs or your warning logs. Or maybe, I don't know if I understand the question entirely. Is that what you're asking?
I guess it's kind of like if it's say like you looking for the app, and then you kind of knows like it's like it was working, but then all of a sudden it's not working, and then you kind of get like an error that you haven't seen before, and it seems like it was kind of like you just need to update the IDE, or maybe update some dependency that's needed that hasn't been updated and then after updating it, then all of a sudden it's working fine. So,
okay. I don't entirely know that answer to that. I would say logging would help you to be able to test it offline, not in production, to see if you can recreate the issue and isolate it. But it sounds like for something like that, you definitely need to deploy an update to update your package or whatever. And I don't know if I understand the scenario well enough to answer, so I'm sorry. Does anybody else understand the question better? Want to offer a better answer than I did? Okay. I don't know everything, so sorry. I apologize. I just don't know. All right. Who's ready for demos? Anybody? Nobody?
Always goes.
We'll try not to be underwhelming. So, has anybody never hooked up Serial Log at all? Okay, perfect. So if you do file new project, and this is .NET 8, this code will change. Okay. This code will change slightly depending which .NET version you're on. They kind of went through an evolution here. If you're .NET Framework, some of this will change. Most of it's going to stay similar. I'm just going to do .NET 8 and higher because that's pretty much what current is. So basically, this is how you bootstrap an app, and this is your file new project. So I'm going to go ahead and this is the best way I could think of doing it without doing live coding, which would be I thought about doing Git check-ins, but all right. So Serial Log. A nice thing to do with Serial Log that's often shown in the documentation is that you can actually put a logger on the bootstrapper itself, so that something doesn't even start up from the first part. You can actually log some of it.
Can you check your HDMI? Good drop.
Well, unplug and plug right now, or?
Yeah, try it real quick.
The chair also, so you can sit down.
Do I need a chair?
Yeah.
No.
It's not connected. Check.
Do I need to do like Windows P maybe and see if I can? So PC only. Let's do duplicate.
Yeah.
I thought I clicked on duplicate. Oh.
There you go.
That was a feature, not a bug.
There you go. We're good.
Okay. I mean, this is fairly straightforward, except for you can put a try catch and a little logging on there. But you can see here, you just you add the Serial Log package, which is there's a bunch of Serial Log packages. So let's do. So the thing about logging is actually logging is fairly easy, minus a couple of small things. So Serial Log ASP.NET Core is the package we're using because this is an MVC website. So we have that. We have the try catch. And then we added this line here just to say add Serial Log. So it adds it as middleware right there, or that's in the service container. So it configures it. And you can see we've got some logging. So this is the world's most basic hello world of logging, basically. It's not showing a lot. So click around a little bit. You got some logging on your command line. It's going to look a little different than maybe the default logging, but generally the same. Something to call out there, though, is by default, when you switch from the built-in logger, iLogger, to Serial Log, you're going to get a lot more noise at first. So there's some things that you can actually filter or adjust the noise level, the verbosity level per namespace, and those are the namespaces that generally get kind of noisy. And then I don't want to show you that yet. In the home controller, I had a couple log statements there. And actually, I shouldn't have closed that. I wanted to show you. So here's the one where I said, do this, don't do that. Where is it? Okay. You see these two lines here? So you can notice that the output's the same except for one of them has some highlighting. It's because that's actually a structured versus unstructured log. So serial log is highlighting the structured fields, whereas the other one is just, it's a string. So the nice thing is, if you were logging this to a database, you can actually have each of those fields in a separate column. And you can index those fields in a separate column. But if you do the other one where you destructured it by accident, now you've just got a text line, and now you have to do a string contains or something like that,
Write a Python script.
Or write a Python script. Yeah. Okay, fairly straightforward, not hard to do. So let's kick it up a notch. And we're doing okay on time. Okay, cool. All right, so building on what we did before, you can see that the old line, there's now a lambda here. And I've added configuration based, so it's going to read my config file to pull in some stuff from there. And that's going to really just pull in your logging levels to make that a little less noisy. And serial log has something also called enrichers, where you can add additional information to your log messages for you. There's a number of enrichers. You can add thread ID. Machine ID is actually really useful, especially if you have a distributed application, to know which server was running on. There's a couple more enrichers. One of them might be, I think it has a remote IP address, which is, I could see being very useful. And you can write your own enrichers if you want to. So in this case, it should now pull from the serial log section, where it's going to quiet the noise down quite a bit. Let's go ahead and do this. You notice how this is not even close to scrolling now. So you get rid of a lot of the noise that really isn't relevant. That just, Microsoft's emitting it because, like I said, they emit a lot of stuff, but you don't really want to know most of that stuff normally. So that actually takes a second to figure out. That took me like a week to figure out because it's not very well documented. So the other part of it is this, by doing that, I'm telling serial log to do the request logging rather than the built-in Microsoft. And there's a note there, and that's actually the difference because this is not documented other than one place. You have to put this serial log request logging after they use static files. Otherwise, you will get a request logging statement for every JavaScript file, every CSS file, every image, and that's where your one request turns into 30. So that's the nuance that you have to read the documentation closely. So if you take one thing away from using serial log, there you go.
I'm always very, very cautious about changing those setups and the order of things.
But that's the that's the key ordering thing. Okay. And then going to just kick it up another notch. And each of these is just building. I just did this instead of live coding because I didn't want to screw up. So here I actually added a compact formatting library. Hey, do you know that's not C#? Okay. So here you can see I'm using a rendered compact format. That's one of the differences. And then I think that's actually wrong. I need to do that one. I never logged to a console in JSON. I don't think it's more readable, personal opinion. One interesting thing though is you will actually see a lot more data fields in it though. I don't know why anybody would want to read that. And the console's for me, not for the machine, so personal opinion.
Spectre console has JSON logging.
Yeah. There are better ones. I'm just showing this one first. But you can see there's definitely like a lot of other, variables in here, like, the verb get, responded, whatever, milliseconds. You have some various GUIDs. But some of these were not shown in the previous one. So it just shows you that this information is in there. So, there's a lot of, there's a lot of accessories you can plug in. So this one's a little nicer. And this is obviously not very hard to do, but just making you guys aware that, it's pretty easy and you can do it. These aren't the fun demos. These are just the. I like this one kind of like get all color. The lighting's not good, but it's actually orange. Trust me. What's that? So that's really just it's really that easy with Serolog. And then, like I said, I normally do code configuration, which I can show you, but you can also do app settings. So here I have it right into a file, which, like I said, I very seldom will do, unless like sometimes like if you're so one of my projects was in AWS, and you would do console logging there because that could then flow right into CloudWatch, and CloudWatch would then handle some stuff for you. Or you can do file-based logging and use something like FluentBit or a log forwarder to ship it off to, say, Datadog or something like that. So like, for example, with Datadog, when we had it in containers, you'd run a tracer agent inside the container, and then you'd run a sidecar, and those between that would ship everything to Datadog and try to piece your telemetry and your logging together. I did that for a large insurance company, I can't tell you which one, who was replacing New Relic because of the cost with Datadog, which ended up being just as expensive. Like I said, I won't tell you which one. I can just tell you, they paid for what they needed. But getting a more fun. Wait, did I remove my? Oh, here it is. I put it in the wrong one. So the thing is, you can also log to multiple files. So, like again, that file might get really long. I need that too. So that file might have a lot of data in it. If you want to log just the errors, I should have, you know what? I should do this. This is easier to do when you're not in front of an audience.
No.
All right, so this here, and again, I don't love file-based configuration because it gets kind of hard. It's a lot more expressive and clean in code, personal opinion. But I do config-based logging for sometimes, and I did it for this demo just for fun. But you see here, we just have a log that's going to do a rolling interval, and then the errors go to a separate log file, so they're a lot easier to find. So it's actually logging twice. Important thing about logging, there's no dry rule. It's okay to duplicate, log it here because it means sense in this context, log it here, log the same thing, log in a different shape, different aggregation, different whatever. Make it easy to consume. But this will give you an error log, and you'll see, I don't have to run, I'll just show you the previous, you get your stack traces there, but you don't get all the other noise. So if you just care about that, you get that. Logging is easy. That's really the only thing you can take away from these, other than a couple of quirks and setting it up. On to more fun is the use cases. Any questions so far? Okay. So, like I said, I like to log to a database. I had to unfortunately delete a lot of my really cool examples and other client samples, so I can't share everything.
Yep.
What's that? So on my references page, there's a guy named Scott Dahl, I believe. He's in the Microsoft MVP. He does Pluralsight courses on Serolog and on logging, and I've stolen a lot of his ideas, and the guy's really smart. Does great courses. I've kind of combined some of my own ideas with his ideas and just come up with my own recipes that they vary by client. But one of the things he kind of did was he had separate tables for each logger. So I kind of had that, and I've changed back to having just one and just using a column to filter. But so here's like when I log to a database, we'll go ahead and just log those too. There's a lot of additional fields I put in here, and you can notice that this isn't just one giant pile of JSON. I have columns, which makes the data pretty quick to query, right? You can put an index on it. Mm-hmm. I just don't understand how a database could be too slow for logging, but it's fast enough for your transactional system that's doing 1,000 times more. Maybe I'm bad at math. But I will say, actually, for my fun app, which I'll show you in a second, there's a lot of logging in there. And I was running on my MSDN credits that you get as a developer. And actually, the problem was I was running on a basic tier and then an S1, and I had to keep upping it because of how much data I had on it, not because of the performance. So I'd run an S1 all day long, and it was at 0% DTUs, and I just had to up it because I exceeded 250 gigabytes of logs on my fun project. So, but some things that are useful to log, obviously you want your date time. In this case, this application is distributed. There's multiple endpoints, there's multiple layers. Just kind of knowing where it comes from can be helpful. Here you can see the first one's just errors, so you're going to have a stack trace. There are some extensions to your log provides, or also you can do some custom code to enrich your error messages to try to get more information. Something I think mine has is I want the stack trace for every log message, whether it was an error or not. And that's useful for finding unused code, or what are all the ways that this code gets used sometimes. And again, I don't care about space because literally, you know, a couple hundred gigabytes in a database, if I'm not querying it, it's just storage. It doesn't matter, you know. And when I want to use it, typically I'll query it offline if it's doing analysis. And if there's a real world use case, then I'll make something more specific that's faster to query. Also worth noting though, I'm not anti-APM. I find that I was unable to answer custom questions my product owner was asking because they wanted to know year-over-year trends. And I was like, well, I got a month of data. How do I do this? Yeah. You can do metrics, and those will persist for longer, where you basically calculate the final aggregate. The problem is if any of your inputs or the formula changes, you can't go back and recalculate it because you lost your inputs. Worth noting though, most of those tools do have an archiving feature where you can, like Datadog will optionally roll off the logs to S3 or you can do Azure Blob or something like that. So that you actually still have the raw data and you can actually bring it back in if you want. But keep the data. Data is valuable. So one of the use cases I really like is I log all of my API traffic coming in and out. It's useful because, actually I can tell you, I did the software for the Board of Cosmetology's testing suite, and then they had to partner with Deloitte, who I'm about to bash in a second. And every time Deloitte did the Salesforce integration called eLicense, where they try to join all the state licensing into one organization. And I would literally just call them and say, hey, you broke your software last night at 11 o'clock. They're like, how'd you know that? It's like, because I can see in my logs where it just all of a sudden started failing. It's like, and here's what you changed, and here's what you need to change it back. And they're looking at me like, we've been searching for 6 hours, and how do you know about our code that we don't know? It's like, well, I'm better at my job. Sorry. Oh, what happened? Oh, sorry.
Skynet.
Yes, my personal application, it's called Skynet. But you can see, like, I actually used to use it to download, that's probably not the better one. I used my personal application would just download stock data, and I built like some apps on top of that. So this is a little better one because this actually works. For the sake of a demo, so I could actually do it, I hooked into a Dad Jokes API service. Yep. But you know, there's some useful stuff. So you see the verb, you can see the status code, you see the response body. Something that was really nice, like when I was pulling Yahoo Finances, they're giving me 100 data points, but I might only need 15 in my app. But once I decided I need the 16th, I add a column, I can go back and reprocess the JSON and bring it back in. It's really good too because you can ask your users what you did, but you can't ask your API what it gave you as a response when you're trying to debug and troubleshoot, right? And likewise, if you have an internal application and you're calling your own backend, you wouldn't know what your backend gave you because that's actually an input. How do you debug your application, your errors, if you don't know what the inputs were? So pretty easy to log. You just put it, you know, one-line logging statement in there and you'll get this. It's also nice to see like, hey, it was, you know, you see the one's 2 seconds, the other ones are like 200 milliseconds. So you can see if some of your system slowness is tied to your APIs getting slower. So really useful. And then, this is a fun one. This is the one I was talking to you about earlier. Back there. Sorry, there's a question, but I can't see because of glare. What was the question?
Yeah, I was wondering, you, like, how do I say, how do you decide, or is there like a pre-built fields that you use, that you pick to log, right? Especially for like an API app, right? It seems like it would be a certain standard of, here's the good set of fields that you should log, right?
That's a great question. It actually ties in this next line. So thank you for asking.
Wow.
I wouldn't have gone there though, so you really helped me. In my previous presentation I used to do, one of the things I used to show was your IIS logs, the W3C logs. There's a tool called logparser.net. It's a 2 megabyte download from Microsoft. It's beautiful. You can aggregate and query those tons of text files very quickly. So if you have IIS logs and you don't have a stats package because they're expensive and hard to set up, this thing will query them. Or the best part is it's got a little flag ring and say just write into a database table for me, and then literally just brief segue. I don't know if this is going to share correctly. Is log parser queries. So this literally is one of the coolest tools Microsoft has and nobody knows about. You'll find something like 50 log parser examples, and it's almost a SQL-ish standard that you can pass the log parser, or you can just literally just tell it to copy on the SQL server. But then you get like, hey, give me slow pages. Give me my top 10 most used pages. Give me the pages with this response code. Give me the page with this referrer. You can find and fix a lot of issues very quickly by just doing some basic queries that are on this page, right? The frustration and how you helped me with this question is, does anybody know what's not in the IIS logs that would be useful? Anybody? Client IP is in there, server IP is in there, date time's in there, the stem is in there, the verb's in there, the time taken's in there, the payload size is in there.
The post body?
Correct. So if you don't have the post body, then there's a lot of things you don't know about what just happened. It doesn't log us for security. So if it's in the query string, you'll see it in the logs, but if it's in the body, you will not see it in the logs. The problem is that's a huge glaring visibility gap for me as a developer. Also, if you deploy to something like Azure, you don't always get IIS logs unless you do some extra work. So I solved that problem. This is a poor example, and the real ones are more elaborate and slightly different. And I'll show you the code for this in a second. Can everybody see that, or do I need to try to magnify it?
All of those are old.
I'm in that list. Whoa,
I
okay.
understand.
So the other answer is I try to log everything I can get that might be useful. But it was basically based upon the IISW3C logs. Speaking of which, Apache has a common log format that is actually not machine parsable, and I'm just dumbfounded by that. Also, the fact that there's a W3C standard, World Wide Web Consortium, and Apache doesn't use it in their open source. Sometimes the world doesn't make sense. I don't know. Anyway, what I'm logging, you have the date time, which is important for choreography, and also sometimes you might have, if you're dealing with money, the date could be actually sensitive for certain things. The verb, because you're calling a REST API, you have to know which endpoint, because you might have a get and a post to the same endpoint. Controller, which this is a slightly different format than a W3C log, which is just going to show you a URL and you have to parse it yourself. So in this case, I'm actually logging this from .NET. So I'm just literally saying, this is the controller I'm using, here's the action, and then I actually serialize whatever the payload was as a JSON object. So I can see exactly what it was. So if you tell me, oh, I caused this problem because I checked this yes box, and I'm like, no, you actually checked the other box. I have your remote IP address if I have your username, I have how long it took, and if that actually caused an exception, boom, here it is also. There's additional values you can add. You get creative. You do whatever you need to do. How do I unzoom? So that one is in this demo. And so what I have here is an action filter. This will work in .NET Framework and .NET Core, although there's slight differences on they moved some of the pieces around. An action filter, does anybody use an action filter? Yeah. It's just a way of putting some code, it's AOP, aspect-oriented programming, that you can put this attribute on any of your controllers or endpoints, and one of the methods will run before, one of them will run after. So the onAction executing runs before. That one has access to the model binder. So very simply, you can just, that's actually not the right line, I should correct that, this is an old version. I originally did as key value, and then I realized if I made the whole thing parent level JSON, it's a lot easier to parse. But you get the idea. Essentially, I just log those, and it's not that hard. You can ask ChatGPT, like I'm trying to get the controller, but it's really easy. The important thing to know is beforehand, and then a slight .NET hack, because I've been doing this for 20-something years, and this is something I did before. Am I okay on time? I just saw you looking at your watch. Okay, I'll go like a couple more minutes. Where'd that line go? Here it is. So I record the start text, and you can throw in view data, which if anybody was around on like .NET or MVC 2.3, that was a big thing. They had view bag, view data. But essentially, that's just a wrapper around stuff that was in .NET since day one. But essentially, I store it just in memory. Throughout the life cycle of your request, from the time it starts to the time it finishes, there are some places you can just stash data. So I stash it there, and then after processing, you no longer have access to the model binder, but now you have access to the status code, the time taken, the response payload, and any exceptions that occurred. So then I just go grab that stuff out of the view data, take it all, and just log it. The beauty of using logging for this is that it's usually async. It's very high performance writes, and if it fails, it doesn't crash your request. So, plus it keeps your context and everything else from getting overly complicated. And then there's various things where I can disable logging. So all I had to do to enable that was put this logging action filter there, and the whole controller is instrumented. And that builds that logging table.
We should have a talk just on AOP next year. That'd be good.
You should. Yeah. Matt Groves wrote the book. He actually loved that I was going to do a talk on Castle Windsor because it's one of the most used NuGet packages that nobody's ever used directly. But here's the fun part. I took it a step further on a project I was modernizing, and we changed out a lot of things, but we didn't change business requirements. Because I actually built using some reflection, and this is going to vary for each project, but generally the same process. If I know what controller it is, I can use reflection to instantiate a type of that controller, right? If I know what method, I could use reflection to call that method. And if I have the data, I can actually recreate all of your data, all your activity. So we changed a bunch of code, but we took the production logging and then took the dev environment, started with the same database, replayed the same activity, and compared the results to say the tool works. We could also compare performance before and after to say if it got faster or slower. If we had an error, we could literally stop it on that line and run through and debug it. So again, it's not about logging so much, it's what you can do with logging. Just get creative. There's so many cool things you can do. So the hard part about this is authentication you have to inject, and then in this case, date time I had to inject. So that's a lot of this is gonna vary based on your application, but it's pretty cool. And I believe that's everything. So thank you for letting me go 13 minutes over. Oh, I'm sorry, there's just a blinding light there. I'm trying not to look that way. Just speak up, sorry.
So, how do you, so this is obviously at the higher level of control, entry point application. If I'm going to log stuff in libraries and things deeper down the stack, what's the best way to do that without making the majority of your library code logging?
AOP. Do you know aspect-oriented programming is? Does everybody else know what it is? So the term is cross-cutting concerns. So typically when you go through a stack trace that's vertical, but your cross-cutting concerns these are concerns across the whole base. So logging is a cross-cutting concern. Authentication is a cross-cutting concern. Security, there's tools. PostSharp's a really cool one if you can afford it. I think it's still commercial though, isn't it? Castle Windsor has one that's free if you know how to use it. Matt Groves has a book on it.
I think PostSharp has a trial or something similar, something community edition.
It's also easy enough to just do an attribute on some of the stuff or something like that. But like with AOP, you can actually just say, hey, go find everything that matches whatever pattern, and then wrap it in this other statement that starts some stuff and does the logging. Your code itself doesn't need to be changed or obfuscated then, and you get all the logging. And that's actually where the idea of this log replay harness came from. Was I had a coworker who was, in spite of how smart he was still a Java developer. But his rule was he wasn't allowed to refactor code unless it had test coverage. So they literally recorded a lot of inputs and outputs from this code in production and used those to generate tests. And then he'd refactor the code and know that he didn't change anything, And I kind of toyed with that idea. I could never sell it. And I actually built the pieces of this over a course of a 10-year journey. I gave him the logging first, and I kind of did, and then finally when it came together, it was pretty cool because previously it had taken a team multiple days to test the application, and I was able to replay 2 or 3 days of production usage and say, most testing actually only suggests that there aren't defects or that certain things do work, but it doesn't prove anything. I was able to prove it worked, which is a hard standard. But most testing just simply proves there aren't bugs that you know about. Doesn't prove it works a lot of times. So, did I answer the full question? Okay. Other questions?
I got one for you.
Okay.
In a very general sense, could you identify situations in which there might be, you could go overboard or do too much?
Mm-hmm. Okay. When I have 250 gigabytes of logs for a sample project.
Any areas you'd recommend a dev to?
Logging's an iterative process. It's log what's useful, and then if you find it's too noisy, find a way to turn it down. If you find that there's something missing, ask Google or ChatGPT how you add it in there, or ask me how. That's not usually the hard part. It's more thinking like creatively, and then there's some barriers where people like you can't log that, or we have to use these tools because they're more professional and whatever enterprise, even though they have limitations. That seems to be more the issues, but like you can definitely log too much, I'm sure. But I'm querying it, so I just put a where clause if I log too much, and then obviously then I get tired of deleting it, so I just build a job to delete it, or I log it less. So.
How difficult is it to set up filtering in some of these libraries like Serialog for like sensitive data that you don't want to log?
I've not done it in Serialog. Datadog's agent actually does it for you. I think the other APMs do.
Mm-hmm.
There is something actually in here. Do I have it in this one? So I'm using JSON.NET, and here it is. There's a no logging attribute that you can put on a field.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is like a password, it'll just skip it. And again, the beauty of these is they kind of work. You can put it in the controller, you can put it in the action, you can put it in the model, you can put it in the field. Like it's just, So that'd be a great example if you have a password or credit card or whatever. I just choose not to log some of that stuff because I don't need it. The beauty of by doing it in reflection is I didn't have to worry about my SSO logins. I just injected who I was into the container I was using, the DI container, and then just said play it forward. So yeah, I mean you have to be careful about some of that, but this would be a good example. And you just again put the no logging attribute on something.
Okay.
It would work. There was something else I was just going to show based on what somebody said. Oh yeah, I remember. So here's my Funzy project. Don't judge me. I had this running in my MSDN credits in Azure before I no longer had MSDN credits in Azure because I quit. But I have a personal interest in finance and investing, and then I just tried to automate some tasks that were annoying to me, stuff like that. And just use this as an example to learn and have fun. Because programming is really fun when you do it for your own reasons. It's sometimes doing it for work. It's not as much fun. And I'm a geek, so sorry. I like the idea of putting log in its own library. And this has much of the same things, but in this case, there's a little older pattern I've evolved a bit. So this is configuration and code, which I kind of like. And here's actually logging to a database. This might be a year or two old, maybe. You see, like here, I have API history. I have an application. So again, you remember that pyramid I said of refining? Like as you identify a use case, you make a more specialized logger. You'll have fewer rows. You're putting things in the right columns. You can index it, and because you have so much less data, you can index the crap out of it and all that stuff, So you might choose like a great example would be like, hey, if I just get one error, don't send me an email. But if I get 10 errors in the same whatever, send me an email, because otherwise you get an inbox full of 1,000, Somebody should be checking it, but if you're going to email me, I want to know. You asked about common fields. The log it'll by default give you certain fields. I then removed some of the ones I don't want and added other ones. So here's, there's examples online. This is super easy to do. But then there's other stuff where like, hey, I go ahead and automatically use reflection to figure out what the call stack was. In the case of some exceptions, it will, there's some other stuff for exceptions with like, hey, it'll do a 2-better string or go in and get like, if it's a database exception or something like that. So it just depends on your code. A lot of this actually is in enrichers now. I mean, this is, but hope that answers the question. So I don't know, there is a filtering option in Microsoft's and also Serialog where you can do some of that as well. But I've not used it because I just log everything.
I think most things also give you an option for regex if you wanted to as well, just for filtering.
Maybe, yeah. I think she was talking about sensitive information filtering, but because you work, where do you work again? I forget. You keep moving.
Web store.
What's that?
Web store.
Okay. So it'll be financial information then.
Yes.
Okay.
Payment information.
So yeah, I mean, you could, and I'm sure there's some logic out there for that.
Yeah.
So.
We definitely have it in our APM and some places in our code.
Okay. Which APM are you using?
I mentioned it earlier. New Relic. Yeah.
Okay. So the thing with those is you can get set up really quickly, but then when you start then that next level gets harder and harder and harder, and you still run into the a la carte things you can't answer,
Yeah.
So another problem with APMs is they're very request oriented. They look at a single request and they'll show you the whole stack. But if there was 4 requests before it, good luck trying to correlate those.
Yeah.
Or if there's 100 other people making the same request, good luck tying it by that field. With a database, I can literally that's changing a where clause. Super easy. I'm not fighting my tools, So I love those tools for their AI, their reporting, their dashboards, their visual. If you can use both, that's the best answer. But the problem, the call out is those things do fall short. And they're also ridiculously expensive.
Mm-hmm.
The cheaper APMs you can get, I think, around $500 a month, $300 a month. Actually, App Insights has got a free tier you can use. It's pretty cheap. But there are limits. And if you get to like 10 gigabytes of logging, it's like $2 a gigabyte. I don't remember the pricing, but I can tell you it's for larger enterprises, it can be $1 million plus spend. That's hard to sell. So often they have it and they'll spend that money, but what you really needed was $3 million worth of it. So so good question though. Thank you. If anybody disagrees with these things too, speak up, by the way.
I'm still stuck on your demo about the replay of actions.
Uh-huh.
'Cause I think that's super cool. But one thing that's thinking like as a potential stump or something is when a person's using, let's think of a website, if they're doing a set of actions on a website, aren't they making presuppositions about like database state? So how do you replay that type of stuff?
They start with the same database backup. So today is the 24th. So production, you have a database backup, say at 2 in the morning. So you just take the logs plus that. And then I'll take that same database backup from production down to dev, which you have to be careful that know that you have production data. And I run it through dev with the exact logs of that plus forward, which you can't do sometimes because of sensitivity of data or various other reasons. But you can also code around some of it too. Like, for example, the client I built that for had a very elaborate SSO that I built. And I just worked around it by just injecting my user into the container. And actually it was more complicated than that. They had background scheduled jobs plus background on-demand jobs. So I didn't know when to pause the web logs to go run a background job and wait for that to finish But it took me 3 weeks to write the whole thing, so it wasn't that terrible. Other than some of the code was written in a hurry.
It would work to log a response from data access layer and then build a mock that serves the session.
That's another use case. I never built it, but I thought about it. Was because I have the API logs. If you put a correlation on the ID on there, it'd be very easy to say, hey, anytime you send me like a stub control, like an auto stub, or that hey, if I call it and I give you this correlation ID, give me the exact response you gave me before.
Okay.
I don't think that'd be terribly hard to build because the hard part actually I think on that was I have to be able to at least have all the API endpoints defined, and then we could just call Common Code and do a database lookup of one table.
Mm-hmm.
If I were going to build this today and you want to have some fun with it, some features that nobody really knows about that have some interesting use cases, Roslyn, the compiler, actually has some really cool code generators built into it. And you could probably use it to say, I'm going to go look at this DLL, generate all these endpoints in code, compile it in memory as you're running this, and then just say, here's the body, call this Lambda. You could probably make this fully dynamic, and it'd be fun to write. I just haven't got to it because I had the use case and then it went away. So, but look up the Roslyn compilers; those are pretty slick.
Really weird stuff in there.
I used it because we had a microservices infrastructure where there was also like 3 layers, and I got tired of every time I added a text box, I had to do a check into this repo, then check into this repo, and check into this repo. I'm like, guys, I added a text box, so it's like, hey, can I just code gen it, so.
Yeah, I got laughed at by coworkers when I got into writing an application that code gens something and then runs generated code into the thing. They were like, this is too complicated. Just calm down. So, but it's cool. You can do something like that.
Yeah. Sorry, where were we at? I lost track. Somebody had a question. Did we finish answering? Okay. You got another question?
Yeah. What's one of the dad jokes you got from the API?
That is an excellent question, and you know what? I forgot to demo that. So I'll tell you what, the easiest way would probably be.
We'll ask for a Skynet demo.
It's at various states of being broken right now. It is a good exercise to have a side project. I encourage everybody to do it. I've rewritten the UI like 6 times, but there's no UI working, and it actually has a part in it called Time Machine that's pretty cool now. Why is Cinderella bad at soccer? She always runs away from the ball. There you go. So here you go. Those are coming from the API, and you'll see them. Actually, you'll see both. You'll see a get random call added to the one, and you'll see the jokes added. So today is 10:24 and 7:27 p.m. So there's your 4 I just added, and then you'll also see the calls to get random here. And it was, I don't know, this is a sample app. I don't know what order they're in. What I did, I actually have a dad joke calendar, so I brought some dad jokes to close off with if you want. Keep in mind, these are hard to read. They're sometimes easier to see. What did the spice merchant say when he was late for his date? Sorry, I ran out of time. Not sure if my sister knows any geography, but Alaska.
That's pretty good, actually. That's great.
This one's actually good. Oh shoot, my iPhone battery is low. Are you saying you ran out of apple juice?
Oh.
And that's our 40
Thank you everybody for the questions and showing up.
Yeah. Chris, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I will close us off with our raffle. We'll hang out until Central kicks us out. Thank you again to Central for hosting us. We really appreciate it.